afternoon, everyone. My co-presenter dumped me, so I'm going to have to do his presentation and mine, all in 30 minutes. I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as I can, but still be as succinct as I can. And I have trouble with my eyes, so you'll see me putting my glasses on and taking them off and so on. How am I moving? Okay, fine. Just that. You're pressing small. Yeah, that's fine. I need a mic, yeah. But before I do that, I'm just going to make some quick opening remarks. I think you guys all know how quickly this continent is growing, right? The population is expected to double between now and 2060. 70% of the buildings that will be here in 2040, 25 years from now, are yet to be built. So, we, with the REITs, and because the population is also growing so rapidly, there's going to be a huge demand for housing. Urban migration is also, happening very rapidly. So cities are going to grow, huge demand for housing, huge demand for all types of buildings, an ideal environment for REITs to flourish. So I'll start with that, and then just let me, can I have the mic now? Yeah, thank you. All right, so let me introduce myself. I used to be the general manager for real estate development for a company called PDM Kenya. We're affiliated with Aga Khan Development Network, and we have a mandate as the network to build green and certify green, our own buildings. We're not into REITs. We did explore it for a while. But in any case, we have been building green for a while. Our pride and joy is our Vienna Court building on State House Crescent. It's LEED Gold certified. And it's a beautiful building and a really, really good business case for going green. One of these days, if you're interested, we can walk you around the building and tell you the features and what the benefits of that green building are. I'm now the general manager for sustainability for PDM. I'm also the chair of the Kenya Green Building Society. My background is I'm a civil engineer, structural civil, and a lawyer. And I'm also now a certified energy manager, a certified carbon assessment professional, and trained on GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative for ESG. So, backwards. So we'll just go through my role in this was supposed to be to talk about social and governance. And Amrish, who is my co-presenter, was going to talk about sustainability, but I guess I'm going to go through both presentations at the same time. So we'll talk about the S and the G, we'll talk about the Kenyan context, we'll talk about building a green business, and then we'll go into Amrish's presentation. Right, so sustainability has become an imperative for companies. A decade ago, reducing environmental impact was just a nice to have, right? But over the last decade, there's been a great deal of attention put into becoming sustainable, specifically because investors are now becoming more aware, so are the consumers, and are demanding that we do things sustainably. So by 2013, the number of companies had increased from a very small percentage around 2011 of 20% to 72% companies that are engaging in sustainability reporting. And in the past 5 years, sustainability has become a critical value driver for businesses. Okay? So today, corporate leaders face an ever-increasing pressure from employees, customers, suppliers, investors to act decidedly on environmental issues. ESG is a necessity. It exposes you to risk, right, as far as identifying your impacts and so on, but it's also an opportunity to it's an enormous business opportunity to bring value into your organization. And you can see that a lot of factors are evolving in the market, which are also driving this, right? Sustainable energy solutions are becoming more and more competitive, which means now you have to keep up with the trend. Public pressure to take decisive action to avert climate catastrophes, which demands real behavior change, not just from companies, but from people as well, right? It's really, really important. We all contribute to mitigating the adverse effects of climate change. And then capital is pouring into the sustainability space, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. So social is the S in ESG, and it revolves around action to improve human rights and experience of people, which at this point in time is not being given the level of attention that it needs. It's sort of, on the side, right? So we'll talk about what some of those aspects are and why they matter. So the built environment, I think all of you know this, it's the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions as a sector. 39% it's responsible for global emissions. And so while this is considered primarily an environmental challenge, the climate crisis is inherently also a social challenge because people are being impacted, right, by these emissions and their adverse effects on climate. So sustainable development cannot be achieved without focusing on social impact. And despite the significant development, again, I said there's a notable deficit in prioritizing the social impact of ESG. And this is information from a report by the World Green Building Council. It's called the social impact the social impact across the built environment. So the built environment generates social impact across a broad spectrum of areas which significantly impact quality of life, health and well-being, and the opportunities available for people and communities. Climate and other stresses are experienced by people in their own homes, their communities, and their cities. For example, almost 1,000 cities will experience extreme heat by 2050. And that's going to obviously put a lot of stress on communities and people. Social issues around health and human rights must become a major factor of climate resilience and adaptation measures. The green building industry alone offers a $2.5 trillion investment opportunity by 2030. Right, so it's like I said, there's risks, but there's a huge opportunity here. So it is not only important to create social impact for whatever stakeholders you're working with, your employees, your community, your customers. It's also to recognize and uphold social value, equity, and justice that may already exist in communities. So we must respect the ecosystem that surrounds us. We must make sure that we don't, run roughshod into places and, knock everything down and rebuild or whatever we tend to do sometimes. So what does the S in ESG actually mean? What is it all about? It's about diversity, it's about inclusion, it's about health, human comfort, and safety. It's about employee welfare, customer well-being, human rights, stakeholder and community engagement, privacy and security. This is around, again, with the Data Protection Act and all of that. Responsible sourcing, and even land rights. So anything that impacts communities and people, this is what the S in ESG is all about. So it's, and when it comes to the built environment, it's specifically about prioritizing people throughout the building life cycle. So, from your site selection process and how you design your buildings and how you accommodate, public amenities and services for the people that are going to be living or working in those buildings. All of that has to be taken into consideration. Even, your carbon footprint of your building, the kind of materials you're using, the potential toxins that could be in those materials, all of those things have to be taken into consideration throughout the life of the building. So the call to action here is to raise awareness. And how we do this is that we need to look at our businesses, the way we're running them, and do a realistic assessment of what are our impacts to our employees, to our customers, to our suppliers, to all of them. And take accountability for that, take action for that. Assess the impacts, understand what you have to do to mitigate those impacts, and then take action to do that mitigation, right? Okay, so we'll move on to the governance, the G in ESG. And governance is basically, the overall, I guess, the overall management structure of ESG, right? It's actually the corporate, how your organization organizes around ESG, the policies that they put in place, how they address stakeholder rights and responsibilities. And again, stakeholders are everybody, right? Your employees, your business relationships, your customers, your suppliers, that whole ecosystem, and the community that you are conducting business in. And how you manage your corporation, how you measure the success of how you're managing your corporation, and then, of course, risk management is a really big one. So there is such a high focus currently on E and S, even though we say S is not being addressed as much as it should. It's still a bigger focus than G, which is often overlooked. It's not moving. Oops, did I go too far? Yeah, okay. So common ESG issues that impact companies, and this is primarily regarding governance, is lack of diversity. So, that whole inclusivity factor. Compensation and whether it's fair. Conflicts of interest between, vested board members or a CEO being a chair at the same time, that kind of stuff. And poor executive judgment. Some ESG governance best practices: improve diversity on the board and the C-suite, implement corporate governance best practices. This, again, is all outlined in the NSC guidelines, like policies that are applicable, in line with the applicable laws and regulations, commitment to ethical values, this is a big one, well-defined roles and responsibilities, effective documented board meetings, board training and evaluation, subsidiary governance structures and policies. So this is all in the guidelines. These are all good practices when you're looking at the G in governance. And I'm sorry, I'm hoping I'm not ignoring the rest of the room by facing this way because I'm looking at the screen. So within Kenya, the REIT-specific ESG legislation is a mix of national and international standards, and it includes the capital markets regulations of 2013, the capital markets corporate governance regulations of 2011, the Capital Markets Authority's Code of Corporate Governance for issuers of securities to the public for 2015, the National Securities Exchange's ESG Disclosure Guidance Manual. And if you guys haven't read that guidance manual, I suggest you do. It's very comprehensive. And of course, other applicable local legal and regulatory requirements, which I have a laundry list of, but I'm not going to go through that in the interest of time. So anyway, the CMA code sets out the principles for companies to adopt towards making corporate governance an integral part of their business strategy. It's based on the premise that good governance leads to improved risk management, enhanced performance and sustainability, and the code applies to entities approved by the CMA to issue securities to the public. I don't know if we're going to share this presentation, so if I can skip some of it in the interest of time. Yeah, so there's just a laundry list there of good governance that's in the CMA code. So some of the things that it talks about is, like, for instance, the chairman and CEO positions must be separate, which is like what I mentioned earlier. The term of independent directors should be limited to 9 years, code of ethics, policies, and so on. If you don't mind, I'm going to go that way now and give those people equal time. Okay, so ESG requirements in Kenya. Both the NSC and the CBK promulgated guidelines for ESG and sustainability reporting. I've already talked about the NSC guidelines manual. It adopts the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative Standard, as the common framework for reporting. And then it provides guidance on how to meet your corporate governance requirements, which is, also aligned with the CMA Corporate Governance Code. And for each different industry sector, they have specific requirements, which is consistent with the GRI. And the guidance is supposed to benefit companies because it ensures transparency, which is one of the biggest things about ESG reporting. The biggest outcomes about ESG reporting is transparency, and ethics is very, very important. It also enhances competitiveness to attract capital investment. So, investors out there are more and more looking for your sustainability practices, right? If they're going to invest with you. I read a statistic somewhere that said that, for instance, currently like 1/5 of assets globally are now, have sustainable investment because they're following sustainable practices. And that's only going to grow. And then provides valuable information to investors. That's just, again, for raising capital. Oh, I went backwards, sorry. Again, I won't go through all of this. You'll get the slides, you can look at it. It's just a list of all the mandatory disclosures that are required. And these are all of the different local Kenyan regulations and legislation that would have to be considered in your ESG reporting. Okay. So, a lot of people have or a lot of companies say they don't know where to start, right? Where do you start with your ESG reporting, right? What is it that you need to tackle? So McKinsey did a really good report on building a green business and lessons learned from sustainability startups, right? So you need to take that first step, however you do it, right? So set a bold sustainability vision, double down on your talent and culture within your organization. Make sure you are really driven by purpose and passion to make the world more sustainable, right? That's the only way that you're going to be able to take these impacts and honestly look at them and honestly figure out how you're going to mitigate those impacts. Deep technology understanding with visionary future aspiration. So a lot of this is, data and KPIs related, right? You have to look at the data, you have to look at how you are impacting the ecosystem around you. You have to look at, how you're going to mitigate that and do that with a vision. Become a role model with a bold experimental mindset. Make sure that you go out there and you try, because until you try, you won't know what's going to happen, right? Shoot, I'm going backwards again. Okay, so that's it for my session, and we'll do the Q&A later. If I can go on to Amrish's session. And bear with me, because I haven't seen this presentation before, so I don't know what it says. Okay, green buildings, impact, cost, and long-term value. Right. This is some information on Amrish's firm, Urban Green Consultants, founded in 2015. They have a team of multidisciplinary engineering and environmental professionals, and they are the leading green building consultancy in the region. They've done a lot of projects in Kenya as well as other countries in Africa. And their clients range from small and medium to large multinationals. They've done work for Google, Microsoft, Maersk. And these are some of the green building certifications. There's different rating tools for rating buildings as green. And so Urban Green Consultants uses LEED, Green Star, IFC Edge, WELL, and these are amongst a ton of rating tools that are out there. They also do building simulation and energy modeling, building performance audits, carbon auditing, environmental impact assessments, and environmental and energy auditing. All right, goodness. What is a green building? Okay, so in general, and I'm not going to go through all of this in the interest of time, but in general, a green building is a building that, one, minimizes the use of resources, right? It minimizes the use of energy, the use of water, minimizes the waste it generates. Preferably, it optimizes passive design features like natural ventilation, natural light, which all again result in less use of energy. It also tries to look at lowering its carbon footprint by procuring locally. So the more you can procure locally your materials for construction, and the more you can look at low carbon alternatives, right? Like low carbon cement, recycled steel, hollow concrete blocks that are made locally. That's what makes the building green, because all of that contributes to reducing its carbon footprint. You also look at features like shading, low emission glass, so that you're not getting a lot of heat gain into your building. We're very lucky in Nairobi because we have a temperate climate and we can take advantage of some of these features, the passive ventilation and daylight and so on. So now Amrish is talking about building simulation and energy modeling. I'm gonna skip this because I want to talk more about ESG and how how the E works in ESG. I don't know what else he has here, so I think this is all a pitch on energy modeling. Yeah, so basically, wow, lots of slides on that stuff. Okay, and the impact on cost. So I can touch quickly on the impact on cost. There's a perception that green buildings cost more than regular buildings, and that's not necessarily true. If you plan it right from the beginning, it should be a tiny percentage premium, but you have to recognize that buildings last for 50 to 70 years, right? So over the life of that building, the amount of savings you can accumulate way makes up for the little premium you paid in the beginning. There have been studies done by IFC, studies done by the World Green Building Council, that basically say that, for instance, a green low-income house, a person that moves into a house like that will literally save a month's worth of utility every year because their utility costs have been reduced. I give you our example, Vienna Court. We only paid a 3% premium. We put in a solar PV system, and that solar PV provides energy for 40% of our common areas. We have 4 basements of parking, we have lifts, lift courts and lobbies. I mean, imagine the savings we make. We also collect more premium rents, which is also what these studies say. You get more premium rents, you get a higher value for your building if it's green. So all of these things are benefits of going green. But the most important reason you guys need to go green and green certify is that while right now the regulatory environment is very loosey-goosey about this stuff, that's going to change. And when it changes, and if your building is still like 5 or 10 years old and has another 50 years of life, you're going to have a stranded asset. Nobody's going to want it unless you then go back and retrofit it. So on the costs, just again, have the mindset that from the very beginning you're going to go green, and you'll be able to minimize that cost premium, and I can guarantee you that the savings will more than make up for it. So going back to ESG and environmental requirements, Again, it's the same. You will be required, if you're looking for financing particularly, to green certify whatever project you will be building, developing, right? So that's part of the E in the ESG reporting, is that you do need to go green. They do ask about energy consumption. What are your plans for reducing your energy consumption, conducting energy audits? And now Kenya has legislation around that anyway, right? You're supposed to, for designated facilities, conduct energy audits at a regular interval. Also, a big thing is going to be, in addition to energy savings and water savings, waste management and circularity. So, in other words, minimizing your waste, but making sure that whatever waste you do produce can be recycled into something useful. And again, regulations are going to get stricter and stricter on this, especially now that there's a lot of focus on the carbon footprint of construction materials. So reducing that carbon footprint of construction materials means using as little of it as you can and making sure that when you do ultimately retrofit or deconstruct, that material can be reused again somewhere else for a useful purpose. Okay? So those are some of the things you need to look out for as far as the E part of the ESG. My throat is getting sore. I think I'll stop right there. Sure. Let me get a drink of water, and then I can do that. It's right there. My glass is right there.
All right, as we give our speaker, she left some nice 3 minutes for questions, and we have some already. So I'll read it out for you. Yes? Very good, yeah. So let's appreciate her, first of all, with a clap. Thank you so much for that. I had someone whispering, I didn't know that's a green building. Now you know. Now you know. Let's check this out. CMA already questions for you. I think he's still around. Let's talk about, kindly share other examples of green buildings in Kenya and a key factor that make them qualify as green. I think this question came before we saw some of the examples that you mentioned, but maybe you could say one or two or so.
Okay. You took my mic.
Example, sorry, you could actually still use the one on stage. Yes, from there. I wanted you to relax from here, if you can.
So generally, they're fairly standard, right? Green features that make a building green. You start with looking at how you orient your building, because it makes a difference where the sun is going to hit your building, right? So orientation, you look at prevailing wind direction, because that impacts your ventilation in your building and your cross ventilation, where you're going to put your windows and stuff. You look at the sizing of your windows, because if they're too big and they're not like a low emission glass or double glazed, then they're going to let in a lot of heat and you get a lot of heat gain into your building. So those are some of the basics you would look at, right? You look at how much you balance that, how much glass you put in based on daylight, because you want light in your natural light in your building, but at the same time you want to minimize the heat gain, those kind of things. So most of the buildings, and then of course if you're using HVAC, heating, venting, well, we don't need heating in Kenya, but if you're using air conditioning, for instance, then you want to look at the efficiency of the air conditioning systems you're using. And again, they're getting more and more efficient. If you're using solar, same thing, sizing it for what your demand is, or however much of your demand you can accommodate, so on. So a lot of these buildings are pretty much using the same kind of features, right? They're using local materials. They're trying to optimize the use of local materials. We can't always get away with using local materials. Yeah. They're using, or they're selecting like low carbon options, for instance, for, cement or steel, They want, some of them are manufacturing or quarrying locally for the stone, like we used stone for our facade in our building, and it's local, from a local quarry. So it's generally the same kind of principles, right? So if you look at, for instance, Sabis School, which is Green Star certified. Sabis focused primarily on, natural ventilation, daylighting, all the passive design elements, right? If you look at Microsoft, they used a lot of what you call